So we are very actively working with service-oriented architecture and NEEM, and then over time using things like the distribution element to facilitate that. Okay, so now let's get to the actual emergency management domain, and I'll give you some specifics on how we're making that happen. So, as I mentioned before, FEMA's Enterprise Architecture Program, we are aligning the different business areas, and we are integrating NEEM into our enterprise data models. This is an example of some work that was done very recently. Actually, it's still draft work, but I'm excited about it. I wanted to make sure you saw it today. This is language that is in FEMA enterprise level data modeling procedures. And as you can see the quote here, our logical data model development will feature every attempt should be made to utilize the NEEM naming and design rules. And then you can actually see application number is one of the most important, if not the most important thing to a disaster survivor. It's their unique identifier so that they can receive support from FEMA. And in our example here, we're actually starting to map these important data elements to the NEEM data model. So this slide shows you, of course, with that said, I made it sound easy. We're just going to whip-bang, change everything in about a year, and we're going to have everything standardized. Well, as you can see, FEMA, we have a very large and autonomous organization, and you can see it covers a lot of different mission areas. So conversely, we are working to make sure that we include all of these organizations. And of course, that starts to spread across a lot of you as the practitioners. So let me give you more of the specific progress to date on what we're doing with the emergency management domain governance, which is part of the NEEM model. So we have worked out a final on a domain stewardship agreement. That is a standard document that is established with the NEEM PMO office that FEMA and DHS OIC are going to be the co-managers of the emergency management domain, and we will have our own domain governance structure. In following good PMO guidelines, we've come up with an internal charter, and that establishes a lot of the responsibilities. We have already had an internal domain meeting, a mini summit that we had about 2 weeks ago, so we can start talking about the challenges and how to accomplish that. And this lists the different representatives of our domain stewardship agreement. And of course, that agreement, it's a standard part of the NEEM PMO process. And the important thing is that I wanted to state here is, I think a great thing that's taking place here is we're establishing responsibility, authority, but also responsibility and accountability. Another example that I've used before is I was a member of a recreation committee at the FEMA facility I worked at Mount Weather, and that's where we decided how the annual summer picnic softball parties would go, whether we'd put sprinkles on the ice cream at the Valentine's Day social. And that organization had a charter and a structure for membership. If I skipped 3 straight meetings without giving an example, they removed me and they put somebody else on the rec committee. Well, when I first got involved with NEEM, I noticed that I was on a conference call and 2 out of the, I think, 14 participants showed up. So it was easier to be part of this national organization than it was to be part of what sprinkles and ice cream were at the Valentine's Day social at Mount Weather. So establishing these kinds of policies, and I know it's a volunteer organization, everybody has their own job, but if the mission is not more obvious, I don't know what is. I mean, we're not selling BMWs here. You saw the example that Patrick gave on what the test scenario is for the interoperability demo. Okay, that should make you shudder thinking about how the if and whens of something like that happening. So I think it's great that we're establishing this kind of responsibility and accountability. So we're establishing a domain charter, as I mentioned. It makes sure and assigns responsibilities between our 2 organizations to make sure that we're doing our jobs well, and that includes disseminating information. It includes involvement from individuals like yourself, and we are going to we are going to make sure that we include practitioners in our organization. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead a couple of these. You can see that we have technical staff and a technical review board that will be a vital part of the emergency management domain process. Again, we want to take, it's the standard from the top. We have to have executive level support, and I can tell you that in the enterprise architecture community, Ira Grossman, my boss, is a rock star. Everybody who's ever met Donna knows the kind of respect that she garners walking into a room. So we have that executive level support. So now we're going from the bottom up approach, and that's why I've come all the way out here today, is to be able to start to facilitate that. So we are going to have technical review board and technical staff so that we have that bottom up approach as well. We also are going to endeavor to measure our accomplishments and keep track of our progress. I think that's another thing that too often is overlooked. Come from an analytical reporting background, and we want to make sure that we measure our success and we incrementally improve continuously. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dennis, who can talk to you about more specifics of EDXL and the rest of our progress.
Okay. Well, thank you, Scott, and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for inviting me here, and I agree with what Patrick and Donna said earlier, especially what Donna said about the hotel. This is a great hotel, and her other comment about EDXL and NEAM, starting back to when I started working at DHS, I think Donna's description is pretty accurate, although I think it was all Donna's fault. I always told her that we could work together, but she never agreed with me. So finally she's coming around, and so thank you, Donna. I appreciate that. Anyway, I want to just talk a little bit about why we did what we did, and to do that, I'm going to tell you a little story. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Tokyo, Japan. I was invited there by the Japanese Industrial Standards Council to talk about public alert and warning systems in the United States. It was a meeting that was hosted by GISC. They were sponsoring a ISO workshop. ISO is an international standards organization, and they're working on developing a standard for an international standard for public warning systems. Well, anyway, I left a few days earlier to number one, to get over the jet lag. That was a 13-hour plane ride, but it was interesting. Tokyo is a very crowded city, but I was amazed at how efficient they were. I was also amazed at the business day, especially the gentlemen going to work. They all pretty much dressed alike. Everyone wore dark suits and white shirts. And after the first day of the workshop, a number of us went out to dinner, and we were talking about the differences in our cultures. And I commented on the efficiency of the Japanese people, especially in Tokyo, and how efficient they are for moving people around the city. And the one gentleman from Japan, he said, well, in our country, it's pretty simple. It's either right or wrong, or black or white. And I thought, well, that probably explains why they dress the way they do. But anyway, he said that in our country, it's different because you have to look at things through multiple lenses. Your structure, your government structure is much more complicated than ours. And everyone has different views. And I translated that comment into those different views, those different lenses that we look through are the different views of the stakeholders. So getting stakeholders involved from day one is very important. And the process that we incorporated in our EDXL standards development process is a stakeholder-driven approach. As Patrick and Scott mentioned, that we do stand up working groups, and we do that from day one, and we get them involved from the very beginning in how we start collecting their requirements to go into this to the OASIS standards development process. So I took that same approach when we decided to have this kickoff meeting. I sat down with Scott and Ira, and we came up with this idea of having a kickoff meeting. And actually, the meeting that we held was a preliminary meeting. What we wanted to do was have a follow-on meeting where we actually invited the stakeholders, the practitioners, that actually benefit from the standards that we develop. As Scott mentioned, we did have our meeting in September, and we wanted to create a shared understanding of the charter agreement between both of our offices and promote the program by aligning the different federal agencies that are also involved in our process. And this is a list of the attendees. Naturally, I was there, Scott was there, Donna was there. We had another program from FEMA, the Disaster Management Program. As Scott mentioned, we had the Emergency Interoperability Consortium represented. We had DNDO, and then we had the OASIS Technical Committee present as well. What we wanted to do was we broke the group into smaller groups with a focus on 3 areas: people, processes, and technologies. And what we wanted to do was to get an idea from the 3 different groups on what they thought were some of the best practices that we could use in managing the EM domain that they knew of, either through the EDXL process or any of the processes they've used in their organization. And then we also asked the other question about whether or not they saw any challenges or obstacles for us or that we needed to be aware of as we moved the domain, the EM domain forward. Again, keeping in mind people, process, technologies. And these are some of the results or some of the areas that came out of those smaller working groups. Participation, naturally get all the right stakeholders involved, user-driven, allow the needs of standards users to guide the standards development process. Issue resolution, very important. Anytime or if an issue comes up, we want to address it immediately so we can move on. And resources, big issue there, especially at the federal level. I look at Scott's organization, my organization. This effort requires a lot of resources, so we need to be able to manage the process and assign the right resources to the right people and to keep this process moving along. Communication is a big, big issue. Communication is very important. We need to communicate amongst all the stakeholders at every level along each process along the way. And we also don't want to reinvent the wheel either. Again, going back to what works well, let's use it. Any idea that anyone comes up with that works well in their organization, let's try to use it as we move forward in managing the EM domain. Coordination and measure. Always have to measure progress. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? How do we get there? These are some of the other issues that came up. Grants and funding, harmonization, implementation support, training, access control, COTS interfaces, federation. The second part of the day, we got the smaller groups back together again, and then we allowed them to break off into separate groups. And this time, again, keeping in mind people, processes, and technologies, what we wanted to do was to plan or map out the next 6 months. What are some of the issues that we really need to address during the next 6 months? And these are some of the results. Funding and resources, again, stakeholder coordination, outreach and education, grants,